The views, topics, and opinions expressed in this video are for entertainment purposes only. All commentary is alleged under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, 1976.
When you look at relationships on reality television, especially on a show like Love and Marriage Huntsville, what you're really watching isn't just romance unfold. You're watching evolution. You're watching identity shift under pressure. And sometimes what you're witnessing isn't growth at all. It's unraveling. Because what we're seeing right now with Lance isn't just a man going through relationship struggles. It's something deeper. It's a contrast, a split, almost like two different versions of the same person existing at different points in time. There's the old Lance, and then there's the new Lance. And the question that nobody is asking directly, but everyone is clearly thinking is, what happened in between? Let's start with what we know. There was a time when Lance carried himself with a certain level of confidence, not just surface-level confidence, but the kind that comes from being grounded, the kind that suggests clarity, direction, and control. The old Lance appeared intentional. He seemed like someone who knew what he wanted, not just from life, but from his relationships. But now, that perception is shifting. Because what we're hearing, and more importantly, what we're seeing paints a very different picture. There's a sense that Lance is off balance. That word matters. Off balance doesn't just mean confused. It suggests instability. It implies that something internally isn't aligned. And when someone is internally misaligned, it always shows up externally. In their decisions, in their communication, in how they show up or fail to show up for the people around them. And that's exactly where the tension begins to build. Because when you're dealing with a relationship that was once defined as exclusive, there's an expectation that comes with that label, not just emotionally, but behaviorally. Exclusive doesn't just mean you're choosing someone, it means you're prioritizing them. But Lance's current behavior tells a different story. We're seeing a man who's redefining effort in a way that doesn't align with his partner's expectations. And that disconnect, that's where conflict lives. Because when one person says, I'm putting in effort, and the other person says, I don't see it, what you're really dealing with isn't just disagreement. It's a mismatch in values. Let's break that down. From Lance's perspective, effort might look like being present with the kids, spending time in shared environments, showing up physically in the household dynamic. And to him, that might feel like enough. But from the other side, effort looks very different. Effort looks like intentional time, planned connection, communication. It looks like date nights that actually happen. It looks like transparency, especially when plans change. And that's where one of the most critical issues comes into play, communication breakdown. Because it's not just about what Lance is doing, it's about what he's not saying. Imagine this scenario. There's an expectation of a date night, a shared plan, something that represents connection between two people trying to build something. And then suddenly, that plan is disrupted, not by circumstance but by choice. One person stays home, expecting that connection. The other goes out, stays out, doesn't communicate. Now from Lance's perspective, this might feel justified. He works, he parents, he feels entitled to personal time. And in isolation, that's not unreasonable. But in the context of an exclusive relationship, that's where it becomes problematic, because exclusivity comes with accountability. And Lance's resistance to that accountability is revealing something deeper. When he says, I don't feel like I owe that to anybody, what he's really expressing is a desire for autonomy without consequence. But relationships don't work like that. You don't get the benefits of exclusivity without the responsibilities that come with it. And this is where we start to see the shift from the old Lance to the new Lance. The old Lance may have understood that balance between independence and partnership. The new Lance, he's leaning heavily into independence, almost to the point of detachment. And that detachment is being interpreted not just by his partner, but by everyone watching, as a lack of focus. Now let's talk about focus, because that word came up repeatedly. Focus in a relationship context doesn't just mean attention. It means prioritization. It means alignment. It means that when you say you're building something with someone, your actions reflect that intention. But what we're seeing instead is inconsistency. Lance acknowledges that there was a time when the relationship was exclusive. He admits that things have changed, that both parties have stepped back, that they're now entertaining other people. And while that honesty is important, it also raises a critical question. If the relationship has shifted, Why hasn't the behavior adjusted accordingly? Because here's where things get complicated. There's still emotional attachment. There's still interest. There's still proximity. They're still showing up in each other's spaces, having conversations, engaging in conflict, which means this isn't a clean break. It's a gray area. And gray areas in relationships, that's where the most damage happens. Because without clear boundaries, expectations become assumptions. And assumptions lead to disappointment. Now let's bring in another layer. Perception. From the outside, it looks like both parties are engaging in similar behavior. Both are outside. Both are entertaining other people. But the motivations behind those actions may be completely different. One might be acting out of frustration. The other might be acting out of avoidance. And those are not the same thing. Because frustration still implies emotional investment. Avoidance suggests withdrawal. And if Lance is operating from a place of avoidance, then what we're really seeing isn't just relationship conflict. It's emotional disengagement. But here's where it gets even more complex. Because despite all of this, despite the lack of clarity, the inconsistency, the shifting definitions, there's still a connection that hasn't been fully severed. They're still asking each other questions, still challenging each other, still trying in some way to understand what went wrong. And that tells us something important. This isn't over, but it's also not functioning. And that's one of the most difficult places to be in a relationship. Because you're not moving forward, but you're not fully letting go either. Now let's address the role of external voices. When someone steps into the conversation and says, "Don't bring anybody around the kids unless it's serious," that introduces a layer of accountability that goes beyond the couple themselves. Now it's not just about their relationship. It's about the environment they're creating for their families. And that raises the stakes. Because when children are involved, inconsistency doesn't just affect the adults. It affects the entire dynamic. And that's where the conversation shifts from personal preference to responsibility. Because at that point, it's no longer just about what Lance wants. It's about what his choices represent. Now let's go back to the central theme. The old Lance versus the new Lance. What we're witnessing isn't just a personality change. It's a shift in priorities. The old Lance seemed relationship-oriented. The new Lance appears self-oriented. And again, self-focus isn't inherently negative. It comes at the expense of clarity, communication, and consistency. It becomes a problem. Because relationships require alignment. And right now, there is none. There's miscommunication. There's unmet expectations. There's emotional confusion. And perhaps most importantly, there's a lack of accountability. Now here's the critical question. Can the old Lance come back? Or is the new Lance the more authentic version? Because sometimes what people perceive as change isn't actually change at all. It's exposure. It's who someone becomes when pressure is applied. When expectations increase. When the relationship demands more than they're willing or able to give. And if that's the case, then this isn't about getting back to who Lance used to be. It's about accepting who he is now and deciding whether that version aligns with what his partner needs. Because, at the end of the day, that's what this all comes down to. Compatibility. Not just in good moments, but in conflict. Not just in intention, but in execution. And right now, the gap between intention and execution is wide. Too wide to ignore. So what we're left with is a relationship that's caught in transition. A man who's navigating his identity in real time. And a situation, what they jokingly called a lituation, that's anything but light. It's complicated. It's layered. And it's far from resolved. Because until Lance decides what he actually wants, and more importantly, until his actions align with that decision, this cycle is going to continue. The conversations, the confusion, the conflict, all of it. Because clarity isn't something you say, it's something you show. And right now, that clarity is missing. So the real question isn't just old Lance versus new Lance. The real question is, which version is real?